Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever met someone who seems to live completely outside the spotlight? They watch everything, they notice everything, but when you look at their profile, it's empty. No posts, no updates, no digital footprint. And in a world where everyone is shouting to be seen, their silence feels almost mysterious. Maybe you're that person. Maybe you used to post, but something shifted. Or maybe you've never felt the need to announce your life to strangers in the first place. Either way, here's the truth nobody really talks about. There is a very real, very deep psychology behind people who choose not to post. And it says far more about them and about the world than most realize. Let's unravel it. The silence that isn't empty. We live in an era where every moment is documented. Birthdays, Starbucks cups, sunsets, heartbreaks dressed up as quotes. Everything becomes content. So when someone chooses not to participate in that cycle, people assume it's shyness or introversion, or that they have nothing to share. But that's almost never the truth. For many silent users, not posting is not a lack of expression, it's a form of control. They choose what the world doesn't get to know. In a culture that forces exposure, silence becomes a kind of personal power. Some people don't post because they're disconnected. Others don't post because they're deeply connected, just not in the way the digital world expects. The inner world of the non-poster. Psychologists have repeatedly found something fascinating. People who rarely post tend to score higher in traits like self-restraint, introspection, emotional independence, internal locus of control. These are people who don't chase approval. Their self-worth doesn't rise or fall with likes. They don't need digital applause to feel real. And in a world obsessed with performance, that kind of self-belief is rare. Most posting online isn't just sharing, it's identity building. It's asking the world quietly, "This is who I am. Do you like it?" But when you stop posting, you stop auditioning, you stop performing, you stop curating your life into digestible pieces. People who don't post often experience life more directly, not for the camera, but for themselves. The burnout that nobody talks about. For many, the break from posting doesn't happen overnight. It starts as exhaustion. One day you realize you're not living anymore. You're documenting, capturing, trying to outdo yesterday's highlight reel. And slowly, it stops feeling real. So you disappear quietly. Not in anger, just in self-preservation. Psychology calls this self-presentational fatigue, the emotional exhaustion that comes from constantly being visible. For people who feel deeply, that visibility becomes overwhelming. So they retreat, not because they don't care, but because they care too much about what's real, what's honest, what's theirs. The private mind of the quiet user. There's a concept in psychology called psychological ownership, the sense that certain experiences belong only to you. When you post something, that ownership weakens. People can judge it, misinterpret it, mock it, consume it. For some people, that trade isn't worth it. They'd rather keep their moments untouched, sacred, private. The parts of life that don't need to be witnessed to be meaningful. And ironically, the people who never post, they often feel life with the highest intensity. They're not distracted by presentation. They are present. They absorb details others rush past, the way someone breathes before telling the truth, the way light hits a wall, the quietness between two people who truly understand each other. Being quiet doesn't mean being empty. It means being full. The fear that hides behind some silences. But let's be honest, not every silence is peaceful. Some people don't post because posting feels dangerous. Maybe they fear being judged. Maybe they fear being misunderstood. Maybe they fear being ignored. For them, the cost of visibility is too high. And social media amplifies that fear. The fear of saying the wrong thing, appearing foolish, being misread, or simply not being enough. So they stay in the shadows, not because they want to disappear, but because they want to be seen accurately. The rebellion of disconnecting. Here's the paradox. Social media was built to connect us, but for many, stepping back is what actually heals them. People who don't post often rediscover relationships that don't need proof, conversations without filters, silence that feels safe, time that feels slower, moments that feel real. And slowly, they realize something profound. Your worth doesn't vanish when nobody is watching. You don't become less real because you stop performing your life online. Sometimes, the truest version of you is the one nobody sees. The real reason they don't post. In the end, people who don't post aren't mysterious. They aren't strange. They aren't cold. They are simply people who have remembered something the rest of the world forgot. Life doesn't need an audience to matter. Some truths don't need to be public. Some emotions don't need a caption. Some moments are too sacred for the algorithm. Not everything beautiful needs to be photographed. Not everything meaningful needs to be shared. And not every human needs to be seen to exist fully. Sometimes the most powerful expression of identity is silence.
When you step away from social media, something subtle happens. When someone stops posting, even for a short while, the world doesn't notice immediately. Feeds keep scrolling, trends keep trending, and the noise just keeps going. But inside that silence, something shifts. You start to feel the weight of your own thoughts again. You began noticing details that used to rush past you. The warmth of sunlight on your arm. The way your breathing slows when no one is watching. The quiet hum of life that doesn't need to be documented to be real. Most people don't realize this. When you stop thinking in captions, your mind finally stops performing. There's a kind of clarity that only arrives in silence. A clarity that people who don't post have been living in for years. And this is where the psychology becomes profound. Because their silence isn't empty. It isn't a void. It's space. Space they use to process, reflect, understand, and recenter themselves without the pressure of an audience. It's not avoidance. It's alignment. People who don't feel the need to post often develop a deeper connection with their internal world because they're not constantly checking how the external world responds to them. And in that quiet, they find something most of us forget exists. A life that belongs entirely to them. The calm they carry isn't boredom, it's depth. People mistake silence for dullness. They assume someone who doesn't post must be uninteresting, antisocial, disconnected. But the opposite is usually true. People who rarely share online are often the most attentive offline. They notice how others speak, how others feel, how others move through a room. They have an inner world that's rich, sometimes overwhelming, because they've spent their lives observing rather than broadcasting. They're not absent, they're absorbing. They're not hiding, they're choosing. And the choice is intentional. They don't want their life turned into a gallery for strangers to scroll through. Because deep down, they've learned something powerful. Not every meaningful moment needs an audience. Some moments are supposed to remain untouched. The psychology behind this is rooted in something bigger. People who don't post often score high in a trait psychologists call introspective identity stability. It means they know who they are, even without feedback. This type of person doesn't rely on virtual applause or curated identity crafting. They don't need the world to validate their hobbies, their relationships, their personality. Their self-worth sits in their chest, not in a screen. They don't need to measure their value in likes. They don't need to explain themselves to be real. They don't need to keep updating the world to feel alive. And if you've ever wondered why they don't post, it's because they've found a kind of peace that doesn't need to be witnessed to be meaningful. But silence isn't always serenity. Let's be honest, not everyone who disappears from social media is doing it from a place of spiritual clarity. Sometimes it's exhaustion. Sometimes it's emotional burnout. Sometimes it's self-protection. There's a certain kind of person who scrolls quietly, not because they're detached, but because they feel too much. They absorb every post, every update, every tragedy, and instead of feeling connected, they feel drained. Social media becomes a place where they once showed up fully, but slowly learned to shrink themselves. Why? Because visibility comes with weight. The fear of being judged, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of saying something wrong, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being ignored. And for some people, that cost becomes too high. So they retreat, not out of indifference, but out of self-preservation. Their silence isn't apathy. Their silence is armor. The ones who don't post aren't missing out. They're reclaiming something. Something beautiful happens when you stop trying to be seen. You start seeing yourself again. You begin noticing who checks on you without needing to be prompted, who remembers you without reminders, who values you without updates. That type of connection, raw, unfiltered, unbroadcasted, is real in a way no platform can replicate. People who don't post choose this. They choose reality over performance, depth over display, presence over presentation. And while everyone else is shouting for attention, they whisper something entirely different. I don't need to be seen to exist. Life begins to look different off the screen. Colors feel richer. Time slows down. Conversations deepen. Moments stop rushing by because you're not trying to capture them. You're simply living. And that's the secret people who don't post carry. They experience life from the inside, not from the outside looking in. They walk through the world without needing proof of every step. They return to a more ancient kind of living, one where memories were kept in the heart, not the camera roll. And this is why they seem different, calmer, more grounded, more present, because they are. But here's the twist. The quietest people often have the most to say.
If you ever sit with them in person, truly sit with them, you'll notice something surprising. They're the ones who can talk for hours when they feel safe. They're the ones who carry stories nobody has ever heard. They're the ones who think deeply, feel deeply, experience deeply. They just don't post deeply. Their silence online isn't a lack of personality. It's a sign of a personality too big to shrink into a box of curated squares. And that's the heart of it. People who don't post aren't mysterious because they're hiding. They're mysterious because they're whole. Because their identity isn't chopped into digestible pieces for consumption. Because their experiences remain sacred. Because their feelings don't need to be filtered and formatted. They are living a life that's theirs, truly theirs, and not even the algorithm gets a share of it. And maybe that's the reminder we all need, that visibility is not the same as value, that silence is not emptiness, that privacy is not isolation, that being unseen is not the same as being alone. And in a world where everything is turned into content, maybe the most rebellious thing you can do is live a life too real to share.
But here's where things get even more interesting. There's a quiet truth that rarely gets said out loud. People who don't post on social media often understand themselves more deeply than the people who do. Because when you are not constantly curating yourself for an audience, something happens. You begin to notice the parts of you that were buried under performance. You begin to reconnect with your inner world. You start asking questions you once ignored. Why do I feel this way? What do I actually want? What matters when nobody is watching? And those questions pull you inward, toward a version of yourself that isn't edited, filtered, or shaped for others' approval. Toward a self that doesn't care about trends or algorithms. Toward a self that is, finally, real. For many people, that rediscovery is uncomfortable at first. Silence forces you to face the parts of yourself that noise kept you distracted from. But over time, silence becomes something else, a place of clarity, a kind of emotional home where you can hear your own thoughts again. Most people don't realize how loud the digital world has become. There is always a new sound, a notification, a like, a comment, an expectation, a reminder that someone somewhere is waiting for you to show up. But the people who don't post, they step outside of that noise long enough to see it for what it is. They begin to see how draining it was, how subtly it shaped them, how quietly it stole their peace. And once you regain that peace, you start to guard it with your life. Some people stay silent online because they finally understand that not every part of you is meant to be public property. Not every feeling deserves an audience. Not every moment is meant to be packaged for others. Life becomes richer when it belongs to you again. The invisible pressure no one talks about. There's something important to understand about social media. It doesn't just show you other people's lives, it shapes how you measure your own. And even people who rarely post still feel this in subtle ways. They see everyone else documenting milestones, successes, vacations, perfect weekends, perfect relationships. And slowly, quietly, they begin to feel like their life is supposed to look like a highlight reel too. That pressure can turn into an ache, the feeling that your regular life isn't enough. But those who choose not to post
often do so as an act of rebellion against that ache. They refuse to perform perfection. They refuse to compete in a race they never signed up for. Instead, they invest in something deeper: presence. Presence is the opposite of performance. It is the art of living in the moment instead of capturing it. It's laughing without thinking about angles. It's crying without worrying about judgment. It's experiencing without the need to prove anything to anyone. Presence is messy and imperfect and raw. And that's exactly why it feels real. People who don't post on social media often value that realness more than anything. They choose to keep the most meaningful parts of their life away from the endless comparisons and calculations that happen online.
The private self versus the performed self. One of the most powerful concepts in psychology is the idea of the private self, the version of you that exists when you are completely alone. The private self is honest, it is vulnerable, it is unfiltered and unperformed. But then there is the performed self, the version of you that appears when you feel watched, even by a potential online audience. When you post online, even when you're being yourself, you are performing something. Your confidence, your humor, your aesthetic, your lifestyle. People who don't post often protect their private self fiercely, not out of fear, but out of a deep understanding that the private self is sacred. They don't want to dilute their identity by turning pieces of their soul into content. They don't want their life to be viewed through the lens of strangers. They want it to remain whole. And that desire to stay whole is not weakness, it's wisdom. The quiet ones are not empty, they are full. One of the biggest misconceptions is that people who don't post are empty, distant, emotionless, or disconnected. But the truth is the exact opposite. They feel deeply, they think deeply, they observe deeply. They are full of thoughts, full of emotions, full of unspoken stories. They simply don't scatter their inner world across digital landscapes. They choose to carry their world inside them, and that kind of internal richness is rare in a time where everything is externalized for validation. The lonely myth. Some people assume that staying off social media means someone is lonely, disconnected, or out of touch. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, many people who don't post are the most connected in real life. They build relationships through presence, not through posts. They invest in conversations rather than captions. They spend time with people rather than performing for them. And the connections they build feel different, warmer, heavier, more real. They don't need comments to feel seen. They don't need likes to feel valued. They don't need followers to feel supported. Their validation comes from something far more reliable, human closeness that isn't measured in metrics. The emotional intelligence of being unseen. There's a quiet form of emotional intelligence in choosing invisibility. It teaches you to listen more than you speak, to observe more than you react, to feel more than you perform, to slow down instead of speed up. People who don't post often have a stronger sense of self because they do not outsource their identity to public approval. They hold their emotional world in their own hands, not in the hands of strangers, algorithms, or trends. And that creates a kind of calm that many people never experience.
Beautifully invisible moment of their lives. But here's the part
almost nobody talks about: the evolution of someone who doesn't post. Because their silence isn't static. It changes. It grows with them. It becomes a mirror reflecting the deeper layers of who they are. Some people don't post because they learned early on that their emotions were too much for others. Some stopped posting because the curated version of themselves never matched how they actually felt. And some simply realized that the world feels softer when it's not constantly watching. But over time, something interesting happens. Silence becomes clarity. Clarity becomes confidence. And confidence becomes a kind of presence that doesn't need validation to be real. They start choosing their interactions more intentionally. Their friendships deepen. Their conversations lengthen. Their attention sharpens. They're no longer scrolling to escape. They're not posting to impress. They're simply present, in a way most people forgot how to be. And that presence becomes a kind of emotional gravity. People feel calmer around them, safer, more real. Because someone who isn't obsessed with performing invites everyone around them to stop performing too. You can always sense these people in a room. They're the ones who don't rush to pull out their phones when something beautiful happens. They're the ones who laugh without worrying about angles, who cry without worrying about judgment, who talk without rehearsing what they should sound like. In a world full of echoes, they feel like a voice. In a world full of noise, they feel like a breath. In a world full of highlight reels, they feel like real life. But there's another side to this story, a quieter, more vulnerable side that even they don't talk about. Some people don't post because they've been hurt before. Maybe someone laughed at their photos. Maybe someone twisted their words. Maybe someone made them feel small, or strange, or uninteresting. So they learned to protect themselves by disappearing. Not dramatically, not angrily, just silently. They became the kind of person who only shares pieces of themselves with those who genuinely earn it. Not the world, not the crowd, not the algorithm. Just the few who listen without judgment. And that selectivity, that carefulness, isn't insecurity. It's emotional intelligence shaped by experience. It's the understanding that visibility is not the same as connection, and that being seen is not the same as being understood. And the longer they stay off the stage, they realize something profound. They don't need an audience. They need peace. Peace from comparison. Peace from judgment. Peace from the performance of constantly proving that life is good enough, or successful enough, or interesting enough to be worthy of attention. When they stop posting, they return to themselves, to the quiet hobbies, to the long walks, to the real conversations, to the unfiltered moments no camera could capture properly anyway. And strangely, this makes their inner world stronger, more grounded, more mature. Because living without an audience forces you to develop a deeper, more intimate relationship with your own thoughts, your own emotions, your own identity. And that's where the next layer of psychology emerges, the identity behind invisibility. People who don't post are often thinkers, observers, deep feelers, overanalyzers, emotionally self-aware, quietly confident, protective of their inner world. These are people who don't need to speak to know what they think. They don't need to show to know who they are. And they don't need to be seen to feel significant. The world has conditioned us to believe that silence equals emptiness. But with them, silence equals depth. They don't seek attention because their attention is already turned inward, and what they find there is richer than any comment section. But there's still another chapter to this story. Some people don't post because they've outgrown the digital version of themselves. They don't resonate with who they were online, the filters, the edits, the persona, the polished mask. So instead of forcing themselves into a version of their identity that no longer fits, they step back. They shed. They unlearn. They rebuild. Their absence becomes a cocoon, a place where transformation happens quietly. And when they return, if they return as someone who no longer needs to be applauded for simply existing. This entire psychological journey points to one truth. Not posting is not a flaw. Not posting is not insecurity. Not posting is not disconnection. Not posting is a form of self-preservation, self-respect, and sometimes self-evolution. Because the people who live quietly often live the most honestly. They understand something most people overlook. Life becomes more meaningful the moment you stop trying to make it look meaningful. And the more they embrace that idea, the more their silence becomes a message in itself. A message that says, I'm not here to be seen. I'm here to live.
You know, in a world where everything is constantly documented, where every meal, every breakup, every sunset is posted, tagged, filtered, and ranked, choosing to remain unseen is almost an act of rebellion, a quiet one, but powerful. Because the truth is, some people don't stay silent because they have nothing to say. They stay silent because what they feel is too real to turn into content. And if that's you, if you've ever felt misunderstood for your quiet presence, judged for your lack of updates, or overlooked because you don't perform your life for an audience, hear this. There is nothing wrong with you. Some people need the world to look at them to feel alive. Others need to step away from the world to feel like themselves again. And both paths are valid. But the ones who choose stillness, the ones who live softly, privately, fully, they understand something the rest of us often forget. Not every moment is meant to be witnessed. Not every feeling is meant to be shared. Not every version of you is meant for the public. Some parts of your life are meant to stay where they belong, close to your chest, close to your heart, and sometimes close to the people who matter most. Because here's the quiet truth. Being unseen does not make you insignificant. Being silent does not make you empty. Being private does not make you disconnected. It simply means you're choosing depth over display, meaning over performance, presence over proof. And in a world that constantly screams for attention, the people who choose the opposite, the ones who don't post, are often the ones who are living the most. If this video made you feel understood, if it put words to something you've carried quietly, then don't forget to stay with us. There's so much more to explore, so many parts of the human mind waiting to be understood. Thank you for being here, quietly, deeply, and exactly as you are.